How are you, man? I'm Gil Roth, and you're listening to a bonus episode of my Virtual Memories Show podcast. This is a COVID check-in episode where I record with a past guest of the podcast to find out how they're holding up during the pandemic. As far as how I'm doing, I didn't get enough sleep last night, so I sound kind of meh today. We stayed up late, by my standards, which is like 10:45 or so. Amy and I were watching Never Surrender, the wonderful little documentary about the movie Galaxy Quest, which is sneakily the best Star Trek movie ever and has one of the greatest casts in modern film. Some people put Wrath of Khan at number one. That's fine. And as far as the greatest cast in a modern movie goes, The Imposters, which stars Stanley Tucci and Oliver Platt, and all of that era's greatest supporting actors, is actually the greatest. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. This morning, I finally finished Kurt Anderson's book, Fantasyland, which gets me over some sort of not finishing a book mental hurdle that's been going on for about a month. So that's good. I hope we can record something this spring. Maybe a daily short and then a longer one later in the summer when his new book comes out, if that's still on schedule, and maybe if we're able to meet in person again because the world gets a little better. Who knows? I would be interested to hear from Kurt whether he thinks this coronavirus comprises a sort of revenge of facts against the magical thinking and Fantasyland beliefs of a big chunk of America today. Not to ascribe a motive or, poetic aspect to this whole pandemic, but if you read his book, you'll get exactly what I'm talking about, that there's a point at which the facts trump reality, or trump misreality, I guess. Anyway, let's get to today's guest. It is my brother, Boaz Roth. He's joining us from the suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri. Boaz is a teacher at a private school out there that's sort of modeled after St. John's College, where he and I both attended grad school. He teaches ancient Greek, English, whatever else needs teaching, and coaches basketball and soccer. I'm probably missing one or two other sports. He and my sister-in-law have 3 kids, and super long-time listeners may recall that he was one of my very first guests on the Virtual Memories Show. That was partly because I was still not going out into the world of people I don't know, and that my brother is one of the better readers I know in my life, but also because at the beginning of 2012, his family lost their home in a fire. Everyone made it out okay. There's no injuries or anything, but they had to rebuild their home and their lives. And we recorded about 6 months after that, 2 or 3 months before they were able to move into the new house. And a lot of that conversation is about how you rebuild a library and a life, and how Cataclysm teaches you what matters and what doesn't, which, kind of informs his outlook on what we're all going through now, and of course is part of the conversation you're about to hear. Now, as caveats go, I did not realize Bo was going to record outside, so I didn't tell him not to do that, and that means his audio quality isn't great. He was recording off the inboard microphone of the laptop, and wind and noise and the leveling thing. The audio quality isn't great. I apologize. I will, in future, put that on the list of requirements that I send prospective daily guests. Actually, I remember the first time many years ago, I think 2013, that an in-person guest told me, let's go record out in the yard instead of here in the living room. And I seriously had like this internal anxiety attack because I was worried about how the sound would come out. I'd just driven 2.5 hours up to this guy's place. I was like, oh my God, now we're going to get all of this noise in the background. It's going to be terrible. And this is before I knew how to eliminate some background noise in that sort of scenario. Anyway, that guest was the author David Gates, who was one of my favorite writers. And we actually just corresponded yesterday. I wrote him to see how he's doing and see if he was interested in doing one of these. He's fine. Everything's good. He's been living in social isolation for years anyway. That said, he doesn't have a mic, headphones, or browser compatible with recording one of these and isn't interested in figuring out how to download all that stuff and buy it. So we will not be hearing from David Gates, but he's doing fine. I was glad to hear from him. And here's me and my brother. So how are you holding up? I promise we won't get like the Cuomos and see who mom loves more. So,
well, for us, we sort of went through this before, but in an inverse way. And remembering that has gotten us through every time we start getting weepy.
How's that?
If you have long-term listeners, they might remember our podcast from 7 or 8 years ago. And we were out of a house. Our house had caught fire in January. And I think you and I recorded sometime in August or July, whatever the outspot missile was. And it took us 9 months to the day from when our house burned down to when we finally moved back in. And so it was the inverse of this. We could go wherever we wanted, but we had no home. And every time we start to feel a little claustrophobic, and we haven't felt that way lately, but at the beginning certainly we did. Every time we felt claustrophobic, we would just remember what it was like. And one of us would say, let's go back to that year, and it's April. Would you have traded that for this? That is to say, you can't leave the house for 4 months, but you get to be back in your home again. And I think all of us would have taken it in a heartbeat. Yeah. So whenever things seem down, we try to remember that, and it pepps us up a little bit. The better temperatures and weather have helped too. I think right now in St. Louis it's sunny and about 60 with a nice breeze. So getting out of the house certainly does help, even if it's just sitting in the backyard and watching people walk. So
I did see on Strava you biked around 40 miles or so a day or so back. So
I've been keeping my biking going. I think that safe social distancing. The walking there has actually been some of the hindrance. I always thought I'd meet my doom from an 18-wheeler or a school bus or a deer at 5:30 in the morning crashing into me. Now I think it's going to be a 4-year-old on a tricycle who never really has been on these paths before and doesn't know what side to stay on when an old age, out of shape biker comes through at 15 miles an hour, not wanting to slow down. So, but globally, I think it's great to see so many people out of their houses walking.
Yeah, we've noticed that in our neighborhood too. There's a lot more neighbors who are out walking around where we've never seen them before, and we've always been the greyhound people to them. We're that couple that's always out walking with their dog. So yeah, they've always seen us from their window, and they seem to think we know who they are because they saw us. But yeah, now they're all getting out, and we'll see if it holds up.
If this goes on a lot longer, people might actually start talking to each other.
Oh, God forbid. We still have to stay 6 feet apart at a minimum, but
That's okay.
Now, you've been able to focus on reading at all, or have you been?
I've actually done an inordinate amount of reading because I've been home. A big challenge for us is that we have to get ready to teach. When the virus was finally taken seriously by all segments of America, except perhaps some in Washington, D.C., our students were on the cusp of spring break. And we made the decision to keep our international students here because America, of course, has its act together, and China is just out of control. And then within a week, everything had shifted, and so we had to send our kids back home. And while everything fell apart in the States, so other than that, we'd have to get ready for online teaching, which is anathema certainly for me, and I think for many of my colleagues. We're really used to the seminar style and being with our students. So there's been a lot of time focused on creating an online curriculum, what that means, watching to see how other people's curricula have fallen apart with this notion that you can Zoom 18 people together and have something that resembles an organic conversation. But other than that, I have been doing a lot of reading. Usually during spring break, I prepare whatever it is my English students will read in the summer, so I saw no reason to stop that. I read The Sun Also Rises and The Razor's Edge. Both, I think, have a great deal to do thematically with what we're going through right now, especially The Sun Also Rises. Mm-hmm. And for reasons I'll tell you about in a second, I've been reading biographies or autobiographies of the famous. The one I finished so far over break has been Elton John's autobiography, Me, which was a real hoot. There's not a lot of self-deception in that one. I think any kind of laundry he has, he airs it all out. And 350 pages. I'm a relatively quick reader, I think. I could not put that thing down. I stayed up very late at night. I'd get to the end of a chapter. I just want to read 2 pages. I binge read, I suppose. I just wanted to see what the next 2 paragraphs of the first 2 paragraphs of the next chapter would entail. And before I knew it, I finished that chapter, and I would repeat the cycle over and over again. It helped, I guess, because I've been a lifelong fan of his music and all phases of his music, and so there was familiar ground to tread on. But those are the 3 books I've finished so far since the middle of May, and now it's just the middle of March.
Yeah,
thinking ahead to May, and now it's just a matter of getting ready for the challenges of what I have to teach. So I've been reading the Ion in Greek as my second-year Greek students. We will get to this dialogue. We will finish it. I have so many kids who are just so talented at art. I really want them to be challenged by what Socrates has Ion try to think about the relationship between the artist, the audience, and the work of art. And in my English class, we're getting ready for the AP test, which I'm a little skeptical for the reasons why it's still being administered, but it is. So I want to prepare my kids as well as possible. But that still means there's room for chess story, and a river runs through it to finish the year, whether it's by Zoom or by some kind of Google Doc discussion. And so they'll at least get to finish things out the right way, as far as I see it.
Yeah,
and on my table, I've started Shoe Dog by Phil Knight.
The one about Nike and the.
Yeah, and I also have the Selected Letters of Ralph Ellison, only in the boring years when he's in college. But if you know Invisible Man well, and I think some of the few books I know really, really well, I can start to pinpoint autobiographical material that made its way to Invisible Man, fictional account of life. And that's been pretty fascinating. So, other than that, this weekend, I don't have much to read.
Understood. Now, what have you... I can barely focus. I'm about to finish my first book since March 7th or 8th. It's 450-page History of America by Kurt Anderson, taking a while, but it's just... it's just the amount of energy, focus, etc., while I've got all the day job stuff and trying to stay up on legislative language and everything else, and juggling all the various members of the trade association. I got a stack of books, but it's the ability to focus on that versus, doing this every day instead. I'm finding useful for me and seemingly for the guest and for the people who've been listening and chiming in about it. So
I heard Anderson on a rival podcast. I won't mention what the heck that podcast was.
I have no rivals. I'm not big enough to be a rival of anyone. So, but
it was a wonderful interview, and it made me wish I had I could clone myself just so I could read all these books that I hear about. It sounds like a great read.
Well, we're supposed to. We talked about getting together, he and I, because he's got a new one coming out in August, and he was closing out his own radio show. So I tweeted to him, and I dropped some names of past guests, and that sounds great. Yeah, let's do one of these later in spring, early summer, in time for the book to come out. Yeah, great, Kurt, that sounds perfect. And then, of course, the world ended. But
as we knew it.
We'll work around it. Well, I've told stories about this in some of the past installments, but yeah, there are people who were not picking up on the end of the world vibe quite as soon as I was, maybe because we had that trip to Japan and we could see how it was affecting things there. When we came back to the States, people were still kind of, oh no, that's not going to happen here. I'm like, yeah, because our healthcare system's much more progressive. No, we're going to be in serious trouble. So
no, I think I think we'll look back first. I think my grandchildren will look at me in the eye and say, "How could you not know?" when I think about all the things we did in that last month, from the middle of March back to the middle of February, that were, you wouldn't even think about doing now. Just going out to dinner at Breadco or something, or whatever you guys call it, Panera.
Yeah.
And we took for granted. How could we not known? And I think in the end, Rudy Gobert is going to be the man who saved America, because
that was
night,
the day. Yeah. That night, the Oval Office speech and the Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson thing happened to be simultaneous with it. But that was my night of, as you recall, I texted you with, "We are so fucked." That was, that very moment was it for me. So.
But he looked like a villain, and he looked like an imbecile, and he woke us all up. He woke me up for sure.
Yeah.
And, I think he woke us up.
Yeah, and once we saw it, from there begin to well, that's the day I started keeping track of cases in New Jersey. We were at 20 that day, the 11th, and we are at 25,500 now. So that's we have limited testing, so we don't really know how many cases there are, but that is I think 10 bazillion% increase over
the math is the math. It's just when you have a group of people in this country that don't believe in math, they believe in math when it comes to tax rates, but don't believe in science. You can pretend all you want, and some of my best friends are still in denial, and the math doesn't change. I hate to say.
Yeah. Now, how have you adapted in terms of the online teaching? Like, have you gotten better at things that you're seeing or not?
Well, we've had spring training. I've met with my English class twice already. We're at the end of the Brothers Karamazov, so they finished the trial over vacation, and they've been turning in their written work dutifully. But I decided to have an open invitation, see who wanted to have a conversation about it. 7 of them chimed in. And what I've discovered is, generally speaking in teaching, if you're giving lectures, you can have 5,000 people. But if there's a seminar setting, once you get to 20, you're in trouble. I don't care. Maybe there are people better at me at this but I kind of think 20. If you've got dead bodies in the room, that's one thing. But if you've got 20 smart kids, it's too many. What I've discovered with Zoom is after 4, it's a no good cap. And so we had that conversation. We met last night. I wanted to go ahead and work on our poetry skills in case that's what shows up on the modified AP. So we read Wordsworth's poem Composed on Westminster Bridge. And again, it was about 7 or 8 kids, and it's just really hard for people to build up equity in the conversation. And, I've railed against screens for the past 10 years, and I really think it deadens kids. Forget the kids. It deadens my colleagues. It deadens me. And the goal is to build compounds, not to split us up into atoms. Right? And this virus has done the opposite. In the world of education, I think 2 things we've discovered. You can go ahead and do this all you want. But number 2, teachers are babysitters, and artificial intelligence isn't getting rid of us anytime soon, unless you want your kids in the house 24/7, trying to figure out what the hell's going on and eating up the bandwidth. So those are some of the lessons I've learned. We have to divide up our kids' time in a certain way. So we're only going to get face time with them once a week. So my Greek students for about, and I've got, I think, 11 in one class, 14 in another. I'll split them up into like maybe 2 or 3 groups and meet them for 20 minutes each over an hour. And most of the work, they'll just have to turn in written translations. And honor is a big deal at our school. I think it's got to be a big deal at everyone's school. And the kids will just have to leave it at their honor that they're not going to go ahead and look at Jowett's terrible translation and then substitute it for their own. But they'll really struggle and then go look at the translation, figure out what's wrong. That's acceptable to me. And with the AP, the AP website has a lot of helpful information. So we'll just have to deal. To me, everyone's going to get, Bezrat Hashem, we get the world back into shape next August. I think every level of education just has to assume this has been a wash. We can give kids whatever grades we want, I know a lot of schools are debating just going to pass-fail in the fourth quarter, getting it over with and dealing with the mess. But I think the whole world's going to essentially have to get a mulligan for the last 3 or 4 months if we're going to get back on again. So whatever we have now is better than nothing. But it certainly is not as good as sitting in a classroom and building something out of words, building a conversation, and building a history with 15 students over the course of the year, which is the great pleasure I've discovered, at least, of teaching. And it's really what lasts, because I don't think kids remember what a genitive is 15 years from now. I find that they are, read the brothers Karamazov, that the final question of the year is which Karamazov you most resemble. When I talk to them 10 or 15 years later, they have trouble remembering the great details from the book. But many of them say that it was a hell of a class. And that's one way, and for me, the best way to measure success, not test scores or anything else. Is there something that took root and still pushes through the other growth of life and finds a bit of sunshine, even if the details of it aren't so clear. And I think that'll be lost a little bit, but we're alive, so we breathe, and hopefully we'll all keep breathing, and we'll be at it again next year.
Yeah. Final question. Which do you miss more, NBA or MLB?
Well, so there are no short answers. And by the way, when we stop, I've got one I've got to share with you. So here's my feeling about sports when you're 52 years old and you have children and you coach, everything else. I can only watch one sport at a time, because for me, sport, if it has any relevance anymore, is the story behind the sport. And every single sport I watch, you can find the story. It's a little bit harder, I find, with football, because the players, they're just numbers, and it's really just uniforms in the end, for the most part. You can't see them; they change teams. But when the playoffs come around, I dig into that, and for about 2 or 3 weeks, I know all the stories of Kansas City and Andy Reid's failures, and this guy's knee injury, and so on and so forth. But I've gotten to the point in my life I can only really follow one thing at a time. So baseball wouldn't have started for me until about late June in a normal situation. I would watch a Yankee game. I would keep track of the standings, but I really had no emotional investment in it until NBA was over. And one reason I said is clearly because the story is coming to a conclusion. I want to see how the book ends. But number two, the baseball just isn't that very good in April and May, just as the basketball isn't really good, and I can see it more acutely in October and November with all the coaching I do. It's just bad, because when you start anything, it's really bad. And then that's why I'm so skeptical that there will be, if whatever the worst is, and there's that line in King Lear, as long as you can say the worst, it ain't the worst. That's a paraphrase. Right. Whatever the worst is, if we get past the worst in June or July, to quote one of my heroes, what are we talking about here? I mean, you're just going to start the playoffs in July?
Oh, no, they've already said a full month of essentially spring training to get back into playing shape. They don't want these guys going out and, and you're looking at July into August. Yeah.
Okay, you have to stop in August because no one wants to go against the NFL because no one will watch. I understand that. But let's just say that even so, as one of your favorite novels ends with, even supposing you could squeeze it all in and finish in late August, when do you start the new season? We already know that players don't want to go to the Olympics because they destroy their bodies for the next regular season. So the answer to your question for me is I hope it all stops, and I hope we rethink it so the world will take my shape and no two sports overlap, and better yet, there's less of them. We don't, it was a big deal in 1978 to see the Monday Night Baseball game of the week, because there's the Houston Astros with their funky uniforms, or the San Diego Padres, or Mark Fidrich. Now, of course, it's just no big deal. I think I felt oversaturated for about 10 or 15 years with sports. Even with my favorite teams, I can't get invested in it until there's money on the table. Who cares?
Right.
It's game number 74 of 162 games, and here comes Tampa Bay the second time into the Bronx. Not interesting for me. So you know what? Kill it. Let football decide when they want to go. If they want more games, to kill more of their players early, and the players are willing to sign on the dotted line, fine. Start the NBA 1 month before the end of the football season when they're bad anyway. Start baseball sometime in June. You don't need 162 games. Have 120 games. Jack up the price. Things will be more valuable in the end because there'll be a scarcity of it, and serve the consumer that way. That's my view. Sitting here in my backyard. So I guess to answer your question, I've missed the NBA because they were getting towards the end of the story. Now, do you want to hear a story?
Sure. We'll do that off mic though. So,
okay.
Thanks for calling in, and we'll, I'll get out to St. Louis sometime. Maybe. No,
you won't. It's okay. But our infection, because if you come here, you're going to have to be quarantined for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So
they're going to see the New Jersey plates, and that's going to be it. So we'll talk soon. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
And that was Boaz Roth. You could check out his Twitter feed at Mr. Bobo Monster, which he doesn't post at too often. It's MRBOBOMONSTER. You can also find our earlier conversation, that 2012 talk, way down at the bottom of the episode list on chimeraobscura.com/VM. We'll be back tomorrow, I hope, with another COVID check-in episode. If you want to send me a little update to read on the air or have something you want to share with the listeners, let me know and we'll set something up. I'm at Groth18, GROTH18 @gmail.com. You can find my contact info at our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com. Also on chimeraobscura.com/VM, there is a menu item for the COVID-19 sessions. If you click on that, you'll find all of the past episodes that we've done and a list of requirements, and maybe an episode or two in advance is mentioned there. And in case you're interested in the remote setup that I use, this is Zencastr that allows me to record these remotes. It's spelled ZENCASTR, so no final E. Zencastr is $20 a month, but my Patreon supporters more than cover it, especially since I'm not spending money anymore on parking, tolls, coffee, etc., subway trips to record in-person episodes. So if you can spare anything, don't put anything in my Patreon. Go find the artists, writers, other creative people in need, etc., and go to their Patreons, their tip jars, their Kickstarters, GoFundMes, whatever. Show them some support. I'm Gil Roth, and this was a bonus episode of my Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. Keep the conversation going, stay safe, and wash your damn hands.